I'm going to start by talking a little bit about what this question that was posed to us for this panel, how it sort of created certain kinds of, I think, healthy confusions in my mind. We'll see if they're healthy or not in a minute. Why are we here? And I was thinking of the different ways to think about this question. You know, why are we here for this conference? Why was this conference put together here and now? On one level, I think I'd like to talk a bit about that and relate that to the creation of Moana Nui back in 2011. But I also think sort of more deeply native. Why were we born to native families? Why are we here as native people with these endless genealogies and equally endless responsibilities to those kupuna? You know, why are we here? The descendants of those people who lived over thousands of years and handed knowledge down and obligations. What are those obligations? What do we bring to this conference as indigenous peoples? And then the sort of broader question for all of us, why are we here, born into this time and into this strange and contorted civilization? I think about all of these things because over the past few years, and really ever since Arnie cornered me into participating in Moana Nui 1, and believe me, that's something, he still has a lot to answer for. Ever since that moment, a number of us were drawn out of what were, to that point, very local struggles in Hawaii to deal with political issues and matters having to do with things like the survival of Hawaiian culture, of history, of language, Hawaiian sovereignty and governance, and brought face to face with issues that seemed to be in the same moment. And I'm going to talk about this contradiction. Issues that seemed to be extremely important on one hand and almost too difficult to completely understand on the other. Globalization, the creation of trade pacts and secret trade pacts between countries and large businesses when we still haven't gotten our own people to understand the very basic elements of colonization, how it's worked since the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. And now we have to deal with a whole other range of difficulties that our own governments cannot deal with. I just wanted to sort of lay that out to you. When we held Moana Nui in 2011, the intentions, I think, were fairly straightforward. APEC was coming to Honolulu, and it seemed an appropriate time to focus public attention on Hawaii, Asia, and Oceania with a different lens than was likely to be used by politicians, corporate representatives, and sadly, the press. That conference, and this one, reveals all of the contradictions of hope and realistic expectations that seem to characterize all of us here who participate in this broad movement to bring a saner, less consumptive and destructive society into existence. I'm half reading and half remembering that this movement of ours is fired by people who live in communities racked by poverty, environmental injustices, military occupation, and misuse, inadequate health care, ruinous diets, and almost negligent educational opportunities. By the way, these were the themes of the talks that took place yesterday during the first day at the adult school in Berkeley, when indigenous peoples gathered to talk about what our issues were. All of these were brought to the fore, and you could recognize in all of the speakers people who have been laboring in communities that have to deal with these issues all of the time. And it's us, in large part, who have brought this larger movement to bear, this larger movement to create saner, less consumptive and destructive societies. It's not surprising to me who does this work today. On one hand, people who are really, really comfortable in the world generally have less reason to change the status quo. But that's only a part of the story, because clearly there are people here who could lead even more comfortable lives. I tend to think that for many of us, those of us who live closer to and beneath the poverty line are people who at some moment in our growing up chose not to pursue wealth as the principal occupation of our lives. And I see quite a few of those people here today. This is a large and broad movement that is largely conducted by people who the rest of the world consider helpless. Poor people, undereducated, unhealthy, striving to create some kind of access to reasonable resources in their own communities. What could such people possibly have to say to the broader issues of how the world is governed and how the world is used? And it turns out we have everything to say about it. Thanks. I'm pausing not for applause, but because I don't know what I'm going to say next. I'm going to sort of break this down into three basic reasons why I and so many people are here. We are here to proclaim our commitment to struggle. Let me use as an example of this commitment to struggle the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, passed by the General Assembly, only recently endorsed by the President of the United States, who the US originally opposed the declaration. Here is an example of something, look, decades of long work that proceeded from a near silence to a compelling volume of patriots, cultural practitioners, scholars and laborers, people who came together to work on this declaration. Close friends devoted their lives to bringing birth to the declaration, and in the process forsook their friendships as the politics of international work and the necessity of dealing with powerful self-interests drove people of principle apart from one another. When I attended the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues at the UN just a couple of weeks ago, those kinds of stories were everywhere in the air. Individuals were named. People who broke off from other people. People who thought of others as sellouts. People who thought of others as being unreasonable, foolish. Heard those stories over and over again. And I thought about how amazing a thing it is that this declaration, which, although certainly imperfect, did absolutely provide a framework for Native people to make claims and assertions, and perhaps even to improve the quality of their lives and their own access to their culture and their traditions. How amazing that such a thing should produce, in addition to that, such terrible political consequences. But we see, for instance, that it continues. And any kind of improvement that we make, and this is why I say we are constantly having to recommit ourselves to struggle, any kind of improvement that we make will be taken and changed, altered, manipulated by people who have real power. Last year, the General Assembly of the UN decided to convene a high-level plenary of member nations to discuss the implementation of the declaration, and this plenary will take place in September of 2014. They have invited very few indigenous peoples as delegates, But even the most experienced of our people believe that the conversations at that high-level plenary will be about us and not with us. What does one do when faced with an institution like the General Assembly and this declaration and the possibility of speaking to member states about how we can implement this declaration and make the survival of indigenous peoples in the world more of a guaranteed thing? Well, some of us, and I think very sane and reasonable voices, are saying that such things cannot be done from the top down in the first place. If the General Assembly is convening a high-level plenary, then the General Assembly will talk about what is important to states. If indigenous peoples want to make the declaration meaningful and matter, they must work from the ground up. I heard Maya yesterday say this. I've heard Santi Hitarangi say the very same thing. You want to make the declaration work, it means going back to your communities. It means looking at the different ways in which domestic and local laws are used against indigenous peoples, and use the declaration as a way of countering them. Build law from the bottom up. Put more faith in the empowerment of the community to do this, and worry less, I guess, about what's being done to you from the higher levels. We are here to celebrate real achievements. We are here to celebrate the inscription of French Polynesia on the list of non-self-governing territories. We believe that it will lead to real political movement and activism, more activism in French Polynesia than we've seen before. We believe that at some point there will be, they will have their moment of self-determination. Those are things worth celebrating. In Hawaii, we celebrate the fact that this year we were able to get the legislature to repeal a 2-year-old law, the Public Lands Development Corporation, a law that would have basically allowed a committee to circumvent almost all of the state and county laws that have to do with land use. Passed by the legislature, signed, actually not just signed by the governor. Governor of the state wanted this badly. He accused those of us who opposed it with being hysterical, and hysterically we proceeded. A lot of people participated in the movement to get this repealed. Many different organizations, and they showed up with their signs. And you know what the really wonderful thing about the PLDC was? It's not that we won this victory, because basically the state just turns around and figures out other ways to get what it wants. Phased in architectural studies, those kinds of things. The state never runs out of opportunities to make things easier for development. What was good about the PLDC victory is that we brought a lot of people together. And because the victory showed people that you just basically have to do this work. You cannot we cannot abdicate to cynicism. We cannot abdicate to this notion that we are helpless, to this belief that states, that companies, multinational companies, that money and capital are more powerful than the voice of people. We cannot surrender that basic point. And so when we celebrate our achievements together, that's as important as the commitment we made to be in the struggle, to be in the first place. And finally, we are also here to recognize one another. Part of the celebration is to remember the struggles that were made by people, is to point out that some of our members have passed on and have gone to live with the ancestors. We need to remember their names. And I want to recognize Soli Niheu, who passed away this past year, an incredible warrior for Kanaka Maoli. And I encourage all of you in your own communities to remember those who have given their, really, basically surrendered their lives to this struggle and said, this is what I am going to do for the rest of my life. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter the cost to my body, to my health, to my frame of mind, because it's really hard to keep a hopeful aspect all of the time. We need to remember these people. We need to celebrate them. We need to keep them foremost in our hearts. And so let me just finish by reiterating the Moana Nui Declaration that we composed together. A fairly large group of people who gathered in Honolulu back in November of 2011, who wanted to come out of this with some kind of statement that said who we were and really dedicated us to the struggle for as long as it takes. And if you haven't heard this before, and if you haven't read this on our website, I will simply say, we, the peoples of Moana Nui, connected by the currents of our ocean home, declare that we will not cooperate with the commodification of life and land as represented by apex predatory, capitalistic practices, distorted information, and secret trade agreements, secret trade negotiations and agreements. We invoke our rights to free, prior, and informed consent. We choose cooperative, trans-Pacific dialogue, action, advocacy, and solidarity between and amongst the peoples of the Pacific, rooted in traditional cultural practices and wisdom. E mau ke eo ka aina I ka pono, a mama ua no. Mahalo nui.
Thank you.